Web browsing on mobile devices was never what it is today, and iPhones are no exception. Apple brought web browsing to the iPhone as early as the original iPhone back in 2007. Since then, the web browsing experience on the iPhone evolved significantly. But where does iPhone web browsing performance sit today? And what about the future? In this video, we will explore the history and the past of web browsing on the iPhone. We will also look at how the iPhone is doing today in terms of web browsing performance, and then we will discuss what the future may hold for it in this space. The original iPhone ran iPhone OS 1, which included Safari. This was revolutionary for that time because Safari was capable of rendering HTML pages that were comparable to those that you'd load on a computer, which was a big improvement compared to the less sophisticated web pages that phones were loading at the time. Multi-touch was also new, and it was an important element that helped provide a better browsing experience by allowing actions like pinching to zoom, double tapping to zoom, and also smooth scrolling. The original iPhone also had Safari with JavaScript enabled by default. JavaScript was a core component of Safari on the original iPhone and was essential for rendering modern web pages, and so that made it a standard feature from the start. But Safari on the iPhone wasn't exactly flawless. It had its fair share of limitations back then. For example, it was a bit slow. Neither Wi-Fi nor Edge provided top speeds at the time, but Wi-Fi was certainly a little better than Edge. It also had no flash support, which prevented users from accessing various multimedia and interactive content that would be embedded on particular websites, like video and audio, animations, as well as games. There was also the fact that you couldn't download files from the web on the iPhone, which was a problem because it's something that is needed and it's considered a very basic function for a web browser to be capable of today. Over the years, and with each newer iPhone model and newer version of iOS, we started seeing numerous improvements to the browsing experience on the iPhone. There were inevitable WebKit improvements, WebKit being the web browser engine used by Safari, among a bunch of other iOS apps, but also the adoption of new web standards and increased website compatibility. These helped make the iPhone a more reliable option when it comes to mobile web browsing. But just as important is the ability to use different browsers and not just Safari, especially in those earlier years when Safari was noticeably underpowered compared to browsers like Chrome, which made its iOS debut in 2012. Not being stuck with Safari was of course welcome, because there are those who prefer Safari but also those who prefer other browsers. Apple later incorporated the long-awaited download function into Safari on the iPhone with the release of iOS 13. This marked the end of a long wait for Safari to become capable of downloading files from the web. And not only that, but iOS also brought the Files app, which is an integrated file repository and is the default location for files that you download with your web browser. Apple then made web browsing a smoother experience, as with basically most other apps, with the implementation of high refresh rate displays on the iPhone, with variable refresh rates up to 120Hz, leading to smoother scrolling and animations. Variable refresh rates are good because your iPhone will only use 120Hz when it's appropriate to do so, ensuring that you get that smooth web browsing experience when you're actually supposed to, and also helping with power efficiency. There was also a focus on privacy and functionality. First, iOS 14.5 brought app tracking transparency, which is not a browser-exclusive feature, but it does technically involve web browsers. This is essentially where you get a pop-up from an app that you've got open, asking you to allow it to track your activity across other apps and websites for purposes such as advertising, which you can either allow or deny. But what's more relevant to web browsing itself is intelligent tracking prevention. Let's say you're looking at something to buy online, and then you suddenly start to see the same item or similar items advertised on nearly every subsequent website that you visit. This happens when cookies and other website data are tracked so that those ads can be shown to you across different websites. Now, intelligent tracking prevention is Apple's way of dealing with this. This is important because many users may actually be uncomfortable with how easily their data can be shared across different websites, even if it's just for advertising. Intelligent tracking prevention is turned on by default and basically hides your IP address from trackers, so advertisers won't be able to use your data across different websites. Second, Just like modern web browsers, Apple made it such that Safari would treat each tab as a separate process, which is very important when a website crashes. When your browser is one big process, the chance of the whole thing crashing is much higher compared to when the browser operates an individual process for each tab, meaning that a particular tab may crash, but that wouldn't necessarily mean that Safari itself would crash. This process separation approach is important for all web browsers, not just Safari, but in Safari's case, we still get to witness its importance firsthand because you still occasionally have individual tabs crashing on later versions of iOS. Now, you might have noticed that all these improvements to the browsing experience on the iPhone were software based, but improvements to the hardware also contributed to a better browsing experience. Three main components help with this. The first being faster CPUs, which has been one of Apple's biggest strengths for a while now. The second is the inclusion of good amounts of RAM in newer iPhones, allowing you to have more tabs open. The third is better modems, whether it be Intel modems, Qualcomm Snapdragon modems, or more recently, Apple's modems. Okay, history lesson's over. After a long journey, what can we say about the web browsing experience on the iPhone today? The focus here is obviously the current iPhone 17 lineup. This year's iPhones essentially build on the improvements that Apple made over the years. The A19 and A19 Pro are very good SoCs. I recently made a video discussing the A19 Pro. Make sure to check it out if you haven't already. But as I mentioned earlier, better SoCs bring about better CPUs and more RAM. The CPUs of the A19 and A19 Pro provide excellent speed, making whichever browser you're using run smoothly and without lag. The RAM upgrade from 8GB to 12GB for most iPhone 17 models was also beneficial. Specifically, not only does it allow you to have more tabs open, but it also helps keeping those tabs loaded in the background if you're switching back and forth between different tabs. This is a situation that I sometimes find myself in, and with my older iPhone 11 Pro Max, which had 4GB of RAM, tabs would occasionally need to reload when returning to them, especially for websites that needed more RAM. But this is not really a problem with my iPhone 17 Pro Max. When it comes to connectivity, the Apple N1 in the iPhone 17 lineup is a big step forward for Apple and is also part of a bigger plan to reduce reliance on third-party manufacturers and have more control over the components inside the iPhone. Wi-Fi 7, which is supported by the N1 chip, brings better speeds, lower latency, and greater network efficiency. And so for web browsing, this means less time needed to load different websites compared to before. As for modems, the iPhone 17 lineup features the Apple C1X in the iPhone Air and the Snapdragon X80 in the rest of the lineup. Both modems are very capable, and as long as you have a decent internet connection, you will be getting good speeds when web browsing. But of course, speed is not everything. When it comes to Safari in particular, iOS 26 did a fair bit to improve the browsing experience. I'm talking about user interface specifically. This slightly more minimalist approach to the UI allows for more content to be displayed, which is especially beneficial for the iPhone 17 Pro Max, which has the biggest display of the lineup. This is actually reminiscent of when the original iPhone was released. Part of that explanation involved Steve Jobs saying that the buttons are there regardless of whether you need them to be there, and I find that a similar approach was applied with iOS 26. But what does the future hold for web browsing on the iPhone? It seems like a fair bit of work can be done to improve Siri search capabilities and AI integration, which are tied to web browsing in a way. So, as many of us know, Siri is still behind other virtual assistants when it comes to the ability to handle more complex queries and how accurate it is when doing so. Apple Intelligence was expected to create a major difference, especially for Siri, but many consider it as being underwhelming. But on a different note, Safari now has a feature that allows you to hide certain elements on a page, similar to an ad blocker extension. But it is possible that Apple may want to take this a step further and develop a smarter function that can automatically deal with elements like heavy ads or tracking scripts. In that sense, Safari may become capable of automatically pausing such elements, which can make a page run more smoothly and can also reduce its RAM consumption. Now, with the inevitable improvements that Apple brings to its processors, we could see Apple taking advantage of upcoming iterations of A-series chips, such as through more effective CPU instructions that would allow for faster performance. The benefit of this would naturally extend to web browsing, and coupled with in-house networking chips and modems, which result in greater harmony between software and hardware, this could lead to superior browser performance, not just with Safari, but pretty much all browsers. Lastly, Apple has been making a lot of progress when it comes to power efficiency, And this year's iPhone 17 lineup is no exception. Because of this, it would be safe to assume that Apple will only be making further improvements to power efficiency, which once again extends to web browsing and would allow for extended periods of web browsing. But what do you think about web browsing on the iPhone? Do you think it's come a long way? Is there a lot of room for improvement? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, share and subscribe. And feel free to let me know in the comments if there is anything tech you're interested in and want me to make a video about. Also, please consider supporting me by donating to my channel through buymeacoffee.com. I would really appreciate any supporters that continue to bring fun and interesting content like this. Only if you can, of course. Link down below. This was the Wizard of Tech, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.